Okay, so the next little lesson here has to do with setting up a project in RStudio to contain your work. Now, one of the biggest sources of errors and difficulty with working in R has to do with keeping track of where your script and data files are relative to the working directory that R is actually in. And so what I'm going to do is walk through the steps of creating a new project, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like when you if you don't sort of open things up in the right kind of way, and how that can sort of bite you on the rear end. If you use RStudio in general, you're going to make a lot fewer of these kinds of errors than if you don't, even if you don't use the project organization structure. But it certainly will help you a great deal if you use RStudio. You will and use the projects, then you basically a whole raft of errors that people have trouble with simply go away. So I'm going to start RStudio from the desktop as a starting point. And you can see I get this little message down here, workspace loaded from ~rdata. So exactly what pathway is that on this computer? getWD is a function that is going to tell me what the user path is. So it's users through documents. Okay, so it's a little bit different from the base user directory. So that's where RStudio is going to open up by default if it doesn't have any other idea about where to open up. So what I'm going to do now is walk through the creation of a project file directory. First, I need to make sure I didn't accidentally create a project directory somewhere. Nope, I did not. So I'm going to do over here in the right-hand corner, there's a little drop-down box labeled project, and it currently says none. So what I want to do is I want to create a new project. And then a dialog box pops up, and I've got a range of different options here. The one that I almost always end up using is existing directory, because I've already created a directory somewhere that's got something in it, some data files or some other kinds of things. But in this case, so in that case, you would follow this path, okay, the existing directory path. I don't have a project yet. I'm basically starting an entirely new project. So I'm going to click the new project option. And then I get another set of options under project type, either an empty project or an R package or a shiny web application. Now these latter two options are for pretty advanced users, so we're just going to create an empty project, which is just going to be a single directory. And it asks then for a directory name and what subfolder to create it as a directory of. So I'm going to just call it, as the exercise does, my project. And I'm going to leave it in my home, what R thinks of as my home folder. And I'm also going to tick create a Git repository. All right, so now we're ready to create our project. RStudio automatically switches into that project, which means it's actually changed the working directory. So if we have a look now, getWD, you'll see that I'm now in the path C users drew documents my_project. If we have a look at the files pane, we've got two new things. One is the .gitignore file, which you recall from the Git lesson is where we tell is what tells Git to what to include and what to exclude. And now we also have this .rproj file, which is how we can start R in the future and get back to this same project, no matter what state R is in. You'll see up here in the corner, RStudio is also saying that we're in the My Project folder. Okay. Now, one of the key things that improves or makes it easier to keep track of what's going on in a complicated project is a very extensive use of subdirectories for separating out different parts of your project. And so what we're going to do is going to create, in order for the rest of the lessons, we need to get a particular data set. So what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to create a folder in here to save the data, and I'm just going to call it data. So it's nice and clear. Now I know I'm always going to look in this subfolder, no matter what I'm doing. I'm going to look in this subfolder for any data files that I might need. And the data file that we're looking for comes from a data set called Gapminder, which you may have heard of. It's some really quite famous and fantastic videos describing the Gapminder data. And the link to the Gapminder data set is on the reading page for that. There's a link right here. And on a PC, I can just right-click on that and save link as. You can get a very similar thing in Safari on a Mac by doing either Control-click or Option-click if you don't have a mouse that does two distinct, the right-click option. Save link as. It's going to pop up a dialog box, ask me where it wants to go, and I want to go to my Documents folder, and then there's my project, and here's my little layout. Now this might look a little different from yours because I've got my Windows set up to show me hidden directories. So you can see there's two directories here actually that start with a dot .git for the Git repository and a .rproducer, which is where RStudio stores information about what it's going to do. I'm going to go into data though, nothing in data, and just leave the file name as it is. Or if you have to find yourself in a situation where you have to type in the file name, make sure you use exactly this file name, gapminder-5yeardata.csv. Okay, so there we've saved that. I'm going to get rid of this window here for a second. Okay, back over here. Let's have a look in data. There's our data set. Now in RStudio, I'll just show you, you can actually just click on this data set and it will open it up in an editor so you can see exactly what's in there as a text file. Generally don't want to mess with data in that form though. So now that we've done that, we're going to create another directory that has graphs as the name. And what am I doing? Here we go. And then we're going to do one more step, okay, which is to make git ignore this directory. So what's going to end up in graphs are outputs from our R project. So we're going to be analyzing data, and we're going to have R throw those generated image files into the graphs directory. Because they're generated from our data set and from the code that we're going to write, we don't want Git to keep track of those images because we can recreate them at any time. So we're basically just going to tell Git to ignore the graphs directory. So I clicked on the git ignore file, and it's just a text file. You can see that it's currently telling Git to ignore the rproj user directory, to ignore the history file where R stores all of its history, and to ignore the workspace file where R stores everything else. So now we're going to add a line to this that simply says graphs. So what this is going to do is tell Git, ignore this entire directory tree. All right, there we go. One last thing to show you here, now that we've created this project, we've got a few extra things in our RStudio window. Here's a drop-down box that gives us the ability to do commits, to pull or push branches of our project, to look at the history, do project setup. There's also a window over here where we can see very clearly which files are being tracked, as well as what their status is. So you can see that currently these question marks indicate that these things have changed, but they're not yet staged, or we haven't done a git add for those things. So I'm just going to click each of these, and now you can see that these things have been added to the repository, but not yet committed, right? Remember that Git operates in two stages. First, you add the files to that index, and then you commit the changes that have been made. So I'm just going to do that commit. Here are the things that we want to add. It's showing us the contents of that my project rproj file, our gitignore file, and our dataset. They're all in green because these are all insertions. And I'm just going to call this the initial commit. There we go. Okay. So now you can see in the Git window, there's nothing because there's no modifications to any of the files that have been made. All right, so that takes us to the end of sort of a brief introduction to project. Oh, I know what I wanted to do. One more thing. So I want to show you now what happens when you change projects or change directories. So let's just take a look here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close this project. So I've stepped out of my project. I'm back into none now. I close this, turn off RStudio. Now, what often happens, I find with students, is you want to start where you've done a bunch of work on a project, you've closed RStudio and gone away. Come back 2 days later, say. Want to start working on the project again. Double-click RStudio. Wait patiently if you're on an old computer like this one. And then up pops RStudio, but it's not in the project we started before. And this is where people start to panic. The working directory is not correct. Their files are all different from what they expected to see. The environment in this case is completely empty. All my work is gone. Oh no, what am I going to do? Well, the reason all the work is gone is that the default RStudio is always going to restart with whatever project it was finished in. So alternatively, if I change into my project, okay, now I'm back to, here's my files, there's my data in particular, much relieved at this point. Still nothing in the environment. But so now I'm going to exit again. We'll see what RStudio does with that project open. A lot of patient waiting on this computer. Okay, now you'll notice that now it says my project, and I'm back in exactly the same spot that I was before. That's the key advantage that RStudio has over just using R by itself, is this sort of memory that it has of where you last were, okay, which is really quite critical. Now, there's another way to start RStudio sort of reliably into a particular project. And so this is only, if you've just got one project that you're working on, just starting RStudio from the desktop is going to take you back to wherever you were. But if you, for example, if I I'm going to change to my project on Astragalus. And I'll exit from here. Now, if I double-click RStudio here, it's going to take me back into the Astragalus project. So I don't want to do that. What I want to do is go to my project. And I may not even be able to remember where, what was the last thing I worked on Friday, say. Now it's Monday morning. I don't remember what I worked on. What I can do is, instead of starting RStudio from the desktop, browse down to the directory where my project is. Here we are, myproject.rproj. Double-click that. Wait patiently. Here we go. And now you see I'm back in my project. So this is sort of, regardless of how many projects you're working on, this double-clicking this rproj file in the directory where your project is will always take you back to the right place. And that's a really critical feature that makes your life much, much easier. So now the working directory is set correctly for us to carry on with, and everything is where we want it, and we've got all of our data and everything is all back again. So if you religiously use RStudio projects to manage your own data analysis and projects, you'll find that you have a lot fewer problems with objects not being found and files missing and things like that. It'll make your life 1,000 times easier. Trust me on this one.